Emily. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first panel event for Women in Tech of the Year. I'm Yasmin from Women in Tech Dubai. Women in Tech Dubai is a UAE-based professional group that is focused on creating a safe space and community for women working in the tech field or are interested in learning more about the field in general. We regularly host events aimed at sharing experiences as a working woman in the industry while also aiming to provide educational workshops primarily run by women. I'm joined by my co-host and co-organizer in Women in Tech DXB, Maria Da Costa, who also hosts bi-weekly study group sessions with Amal, Amine, to give women a safe space to practice interview type questions and also let them fail safely and prepare them to actually ace technical interviews. Today's all-female panel is aimed at answering questions and giving advice on how to navigate around getting a career in the tech field as a new graduate or someone who is making a career switch from a different field. We have 4 very experienced professionals who understand the ins and outs of a career in tech. Sana'a is a technical recruiter and founder of Crank Recruitment. Priyanka is a digital engineering lead at Banque Francie. Juliette is a software engineer who graduated from a boot camp, and Amal is a software engineer at Microsoft. We'll ask each one of them a set of questions, and any of the other panelists can jump in at any time with their experiences or thoughts on the question itself, and hopefully we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. If you are a job seeker generally, we have created an online forum for Women in Tech DXB where you can fill in your details. It'll get uploaded into an Excel sheet, and we'll share that in our social media profiles anywhere. So it'll help you get a job, hopefully. So with that done, I'm going to get started, and we can start asking questions and introducing the panelists in more detail. So the first panelist that will be kind of seeking advice for is actually Sana'a Alam. She is a technical recruiter and founder of Crank Recruitment, and it's born out of the tech ecosystem. She works with different types of startups and established tech hubs, and she's a huge advocate for actually helping balance out like the gender difference and making sure that she gets really good, passionate female CTOs and CIOs with the best employers. She loves working with women in tech and helps them in their professional journey as the tech world needs a little bit more empathy. Do you want to say anything, Sana'a? Do you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
I think you've done a perfect job. Thank you so much for your kind words. And yeah, I love gender diversity. I'm a big pole bearer for having females, especially in the tech industry, because I think a lot of applications that we are currently using are mostly developed by men, and there's like a huge gap. We still need to do a lot more, and to be out there and share our inputs and obviously bring in a lot of empathy, because 2 genders are totally different. One is Mars and one is Venus. So yeah, I'm a big pole bearer for that.
Awesome. With that, I did have some questions prepared that I kind of want to ask you. And I think it would be really relevant for people who are actually looking for jobs generally as engineers. So you've obviously been around in the recruitment industry for a very long time, and you kind of know what to look for in a specific person when it comes to actually linking them to a job. So with that, I did want to know, like, what are some strategies job seekers can use to actually get a job and be more recruiter friendly and get found? What type of platform should I be using? Like, I know LinkedIn is there, but like, is there something else?
Yeah, I think I would like to address this question both from the perspective of fresh graduates and also from the perspective of experienced professionals. So the first thing any graduate should do before they even complete their university or college is to prepare their resume and have it written professionally. And by professionally, I mean someone who understands what recruiters look for and what are the CV formats that are there, because CV is your advertisement tool, whether you're professional or you're a fresh graduate. So that tool should advertise you as best in the best way possible, right? It has to make sure you reach top of the pile pretty fast, right? So if you cannot write it professionally yourself, hire a professional who's actually in the field of recruiting and knows how to go through tons of resumes and how to highlight your skills and your abilities, your projects, whether you have done it in the university, whether you have created some applications. And specifically speaking about tech industry, what we like to read from resumes is like, what is your technology stack and how have you used it? What are the programming principles you have followed? What kind of deployment you have done, architectures, et cetera, et cetera. We want to look at that, right? We don't want to wait to give you a call and ask you, have you worked on microservices or not? Highlight those things, like what kind of APIs you have built, et cetera. And going back to the university professionals who are fresh graduates, they need to highlight the projects that they have worked on if they haven't done an internship. And if they've worked on an internship, they need to highlight what they have achieved during those things. So your resume should advertise you appropriately. The other thing is, once you have done that, also make sure your LinkedIn is populated. And when you populate your LinkedIn, don't stop there. LinkedIn is a big tool to push you out into the workforce and create opportunities for you. Keep on posting relevant content, which is relevant to your profession and not just random thing, not just Facebook type posts. Shy away from those. Create posts, comment, share content, create polls, etc. So this creates an algorithm or makes your profile much more visible to people and to recruiters, etc. Sometimes hiring managers are looking at LinkedIn and they might see, okay, you're an interesting person, we should reach out to you. Once you have done that, not only LinkedIn, try to be on GitHub, Stack Overflow, etc., whatever you think recruiters are. But from a recruitment community, I would say that recruiters are mostly on LinkedIn. 90% of the time they're hiring from LinkedIn. So use that. It's a free tool. Use it to the maximum. And if you don't know how to use it, hire a professional who can guide you for that. Once you have done that, and you have applied on jobs, for example, have an outreach strategy for the professionals and also for the fresh graduates. Reach out to the hiring managers or the potential decision makers and share with them, like, why are you right for this job, or why do you want to work for that company, even if there's no job advertised. So an outreach strategy really, really works. I have helped so many people in my life from my social network and friends, candidates, etc., to follow these steps, and they have found jobs, and they've always been grateful that they got in touch with me. So yeah, this is really great. And let's suppose you got an interview, it went well, and you don't hear anything for a week or a few days. Don't wait. Reach out, follow up, and your follow-up shares with the client with the employer that you are interested in them and that you enjoyed your interview process, and you would like to know what are the next steps. Hopefully they will invite you for another round of interview. And this happened quite recently. Somebody asked me, hey, no, they haven't replied. I interviewed, I went, I spent my time, blah, blah, blah. And then my only reply was follow up. I only said these two words. And the next day she got back to me and she said, hey, thank you so much for telling me to follow up. I got another round of final interview. So yeah, follow-up is really, really good phenomenon. So you should definitely do that. So this is a few tips I can share for your job search strategy.
Oh, those are amazing tips. In terms of like hiring a professional, like what platforms can I look at to actually find a professional? Would it be like on LinkedIn as well? And like, how do I find someone to actually help me boost my LinkedIn profile and actually review my CV?
Well, I do that, but I'm not. There are some people who are doing it as like their business. I can't recall their names, but a couple of them are in States, so I'm not sure if you can reach out to them. There are a few in UAE. But from tech perspective, I'm not sure if I know anybody who is doing coaching. One of the things, by the way, I forgot to mention is that have great communication skills. And I can assure you, I have seen so many candidates from different parts of the world. There's one basic thing that they lack is their spoken English. Unfortunately, English is a common language and they need to communicate very fluidly and understandably. So this is one of the things that people really, really need to work on. There's one candidate who reached the final stage, but the hiring manager, a VP of engineering, said that sometimes I just can't understand him. So imagine how you will be working with teams, right? So work on your communication skills. There's YouTube's videos out there. So try to find who are the professionals who are experts in your field. I can for now just give my example in tech industry as a recruiter, but there are some other professionals out there who are helping this as a business. And I also help people in their career transitions as well.
All right, awesome. So if anyone's looking for career CV updates, check out Sana'a. So let's move on to the next question. Great answer, by the way. Say, for example, I actually do get an offer, and the salary is good, but I'm like wondering if I can do better. Like, how do I actually negotiate an offer with the company that's given me the offer?
Well, job offers are, I mean, salary negotiation at that time is quite tricky, but it's not difficult. It's not rocket science. It's just how well you're prepared for. Once you get a call for an interview, whether from a recruiter or from an employer, make sure you do your market research and never ever share your current compensation because you are not being interviewed for what you're currently making. You're being interviewed for what value you can add to the employer and your experience that you have gained. So let's say you have done your market research and the value that you think that you should be offered is Y, and they have offered you X. You can. What I suggest, always have a call with the recruiter instead of emailing, because that can sound, can be interpreted as they would want to. So on a call with a recruiter, you can say, hey, you have offered me X. Obviously, thank them, blah, 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 all of those things are formalities. And, share your interest in joining them. You can say, you've offered me X, but I think if you offer me Y, I would join you guys immediately. And here is why. Then explain your reasons that I have done my market research. I've also seen in my community, this is the current, the range that people are getting. And I would be, very more than happy if you guys can do a revision in the offer and offer me this. And on the call, you can also ask the recruiter, like, what are the benefits that you're offering? What are the bonuses, perks? Is there an equity offered as well or not? So, and if the recruiter asks you, so your current, what are is your current salary? Never ever share that. You can say that I'm not, comfortable sharing that, but you can share the range that you're going to offer for this role or not. And then I can let you know if this is something I'm looking for or not.
All right. I think it's really important to really emphasize the point. Do not share your salary unless you're really happy with it.
I'm a recruiter. I don't know why recruiters have this, bad reputation, but we're, I think I'm mostly on the side of the candidates, and I want them to make the right salary, and also on the side of the employers to provide them the best talent possible.
I think that's really that's a really great approach. And yeah, you really need to get paid what you're actually worth, and negotiating is a really big part of it. When you actually do get the offer, I think that's when the candidate is they have the most power when it comes to negotiating at that point, because they obviously want you by then. So
yeah, and one point I want to add is that usually, most of the time, your first offer is actually not the maximum budget that the employer has. They're always starting from the lowest budget, and they will be extremely happy if you accept the first offer. So always negotiate. And if after negotiating, you realize that, they can share that this is the budget that they have had, blah, 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 negotiate on other parts, like how soon do you guys do performance reviews, and what's the culture like, blah, 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 all of those things. Yeah.
Oh, those are literally amazing tips. So thank you, Sana'a. We're actually almost at our last question. So I think we kind of already answered this a little bit, but how much online presence should a job seeker have to get noticed? There are platforms like GitHub, Stack Overflow. I'm not sure if anyone checks LeetCode. There's also CodePen, and there's just so many online platforms to actually share your work and what you do. But how much is enough to actually get picked up by a recruiter or by a hiring manager? How much should I work for this?
I think you should not overwhelm yourself with that. But let's suppose, some companies, I'm going to speak from the perspective of recruiters so that you understand if we have tons of positions, we don't have time to go through all different platforms. We will only look at your profile, how professionally you have written it, your resume and our conversation with you. But if a recruiter has maximum 3 or 4 roles to fill in a month, they have enough time to source candidates from GitHub, Stack Overflow, etc. So whichever community you feel you're comfortable with, usually it's GitHub, be out there, share your repositories, etc., and talk about your projects. But also leverage that on LinkedIn. You can easily share links, right? And one of the other things I would also like to share is create your own niche brand. If you can, if you go on Instagram, share your UI designs, etc., some coding strings, blah, blah, blah. Create a separate niche, which is not even your personal account, it's just your professional account. Highlight yourself as much as is possible, and you will be surprised to see how many recruiters will reach out to you. Your hiring managers will reach out to you.
Awesome. Actually, yeah, that's really interesting. I remember the very first job interest I got was from GitHub, and I was very confused by it because I only had my university projects there, like they were nothing. But yeah, it was like online presence is really important. So thank you so much, Sana. Your answers were super insightful, and it's really great to have a recruiter on board. So thank you. Do you have any other things that you'd like to add on before we move on to the next section?
I just want to mention one thing about the salary negotiations is sometimes candidates think this is what they need because they have loans or whatever financial obligations. Your need or your current salary is not equal to the market value, right? So you should always compare and always speak from the market value perspective. And the other thing I want to share is that if you are offered a lower salary than what you think you deserve, be very brave to walk away, because when you end up working for a lower salary, you will be stressed. And when you find out you're actually offered lower than what your current peers are working on, you'll never be happy with that.
Yeah, that's extremely true. I'm not sure I don't think people share. Oh, actually, there's a really good QA question. Do you mind if I ask that right now?
Sure.
All right. Can you elaborate on performance review and career ladders or a career matrix and how this can actually impact negotiation?
So I don't see this question in the chat box.
I'll type it for you. It's in the YouTube live stream. So.
Just repeat the question, maybe.
Can you elaborate on performance reviews and career ladders and how this can actually impact negotiations? So why would performance reviews or frequent ones be something that actually negotiate on?
What I meant by performance reviews is that you want to know what is the frequency of reviews in an organization when they're offering you, let's say, an average market salary. So you want to know, like, what are your chances for a higher salary or a raise, whether it's in a year or in 6 months. If it's in a year, then you want to negotiate on your current salary because a year is 12 months, right? And if it is 6 months, it's up to you. Like, what is your cup of tea right now, right? And career ladders, yes, you have to ask about career ladders because software engineers are of different levels, right? There is maybe you're hired as a software engineer in the back end, et cetera, but you still need coaching. But what will happen when you reach the next level, when you can do everything on your own, the whole software development life cycle, for example? What grade that is, and what happens after that? Do you have a roadmap for becoming a principal, or you have a roadmap for becoming a engineering manager or a staff manager? Understanding this roadmap will help you making a decision besides the job offer as well. Like, is it this an organization that you want to work for or not? Does this organization care enough for you or not? Do they also have L&D facilities for you or not? So that's why these things are important. But if you're negotiating in your current employer based on your performance reviews, use those and highlight your achievements with your hiring managers to ask for a higher raise.
All right, that's an awesome answer. I feel like we can spend the whole session talking. You're giving really good advice. So thank you so much, Sana. So now we'll move on to Juliette and ask her a series of questions from the perspective of a software engineer who made a career shift from, I think, international relations into software engineering. So yeah, as I mentioned, Juliette is a software engineer. She decided, I'm not sure of the journey, to do a boot camp with Laywagon, which was 9 weeks long. And she eventually got a career, like, or a job as a software engineer. So Juliette, I'm very interested in like your journey and like really how difficult was the shift from something like international relations into software engineering. So yeah, can you tell us more about yourself and like how the shift was for you?
Yeah, for sure. And thank you, Sana, for those tips. Those were on point. I agree with all of them. But I guess from my experience, I went to university, and like you said, I majored in political science, international relations, and minored in history and Latin American studies. So definitely very much liberal arts based. Wanted to be a lawyer when I was in school. Avoided everything math related. Like I remember just thinking that the technical was the most boring, crazy thing in the world, made for guys in basements with Tetris shirts. Like for me, I had the entire sort of stereotype in my head. And then I started working in the government, and I realized that, like many government officials do, I think eventually, was that it was very much a bureaucratic process. It was very frustrating. We weren't getting stuff done. I was meant to be representing the Panamanian people, but they didn't even know what I was doing. Oftentimes, I didn't even agree with the decisions that like the government made us do. And so I started sort of going through this very introspective process of what was my role and how could I sort of support, while I was there working in that like position. And so that led me into like a very deep rabbit hole in processes. I was like, a lot of the things that we're trying to solve here are problems of the 21st century while we're using tools of the 20th century to solve them. Like there is clearly some crash, not only on expectations, but also in what we can actually accomplish. And so I started looking at what technologies could help us sort of automate the processes, make everything more effective, more efficient, more transparent. And really it was sort of through that rabbit hole that eventually I decided I needed to create my own political tech startup. And I started getting into blockchain and sort of went down this research for months. Until eventually I created a business plan and I started looking for engineers to help me craft my project. And I realized I didn't understand anything. I was like, how can I hire these people? What am I looking for? Who's better? Who's not? Like, I just didn't understand the requirements. And so I came to the conclusion that I needed to understand them in a deeper level. At first, of course, played a bit myself online, did the whole coding tutorials for several weeks until I realized that I needed something a bit more structured that could hold me accountable for X amount of time. So after digging deep, looking through reviews, I selected Laywagon. So I moved to Berlin, did the program for 9 weeks. And I think especially, and now looking back, coming from such a structured protocolar environment, and then coming into innovation and technology where the craziness is encouraged, right? You want to be thinking outside the box. You want to be curious. You want to be constantly learning and updating because change is promoted. And so I was hooked. It was something that it didn't come natural to me. So especially as you asked sort of that, how did that transition go? I was very much used to thinking in contrast, in merging gray areas. You get to development and it works or it doesn't. Like that's it. And so it really changed a lot of how I think and how I've been structuring sort of my thought process. Working through assumptions, first principles, reading a lot. I went through very much a cycle of reading like so many documentations. I went through tutorial purgatory heavily, so just did like tutorials nonstop. And then when it actually came to building, I realized that how was I meant to go through the tutorials again? Now I just had to decipher it on my own. So definitely lesson there, build more than you do tutorials. And so eventually it all started, sort of wrapping together. I started working on some freelance projects, which I think is a great way for bootcamp graduates to start, because we all have friends who need some type of website, some type of app. And it's a great way to not only build your portfolio, but really gain experience, understand requirements, craft the product end to end, as well as teaching back. So interestingly enough, you may not know, you may not be a senior software engineer by the end of 9 weeks, but you know more than you knew when you started. And so that means you already have a lot that you can teach other people. And really, the more that you can pass that information forward, the more that that grounds onto your own. And then they'll ask questions that you were like, oh, that's a great point, actually. That's how that connects. And so I went through a big teaching phase as well, which really grounded my knowledge.
Wow, that's amazing. I find it really amazing that you were already kind of thinking like an engineer way before you did your whole boot camp thing when it came to actually improving processes at the government office that you were already working on. So it's like you were always meant to be an engineer, just eventually
I think so too.
Amazing journey. But I did want to understand how did you actually manage, or how difficult was it to actually get your first software engineering role, like on a contract software engineer? Like, how was that moment for you? How difficult was it to actually get to that point?
Yeah. So I think a big part of it was more psychological barriers than it really was a market barrier. Especially coming from a political science background, I remember very much heavily thinking why would anyone choose my profile over someone who did a computer science degree? If I am competing against those people, I'm not in the winning side of things. I'm not in the race. And so it really took me a long time to understand the importance that my personal monopoly and sort of my personal narrative brought to the table. Because I had a diverse background, that meant that I saw things differently, that I could come in with different questions, different perspective, very human-centric approach to engineering. And so it was only when I really started tapping into that and sort of pushing that through my interviews, through my CV, through my articles, and sort of also increasing that digital presence that you were mentioning earlier, that it really just stuck. And I think it's one of those things that the moment you get one, you just need that first engineering job. From then on, it's you're in the inside club, everything just starts piling up. And so I think it's a hard question to say, because I got a lot of freelance gigs before I landed my first full-time engineering role. I think it was around a year, which I just spent traveling, teaching, freelance. I did the whole digital nomad thing, so I wasn't really looking that strongly, for a job. Amazing. But I think in many ways I probably just did have that psychological barrier of I'm not ready to look for a job yet. I'm just gonna freelance here and there until I sort of grew that portfolio to be ready, I think, for those interview calls.
Oh, that's awesome. I think what you really mentioned is, until I realized I can actually sell myself as someone with experience in a completely different field, and that would to my advantage. I think until you get to that point where you can confidently sell yourself to a prospective and hiring company, it's really hard for you to actually get through that first round if you're not fully believing that you can sell yourself based on what you have, what your strengths are. So
yeah, and it's hard because especially when you look at the numbers, and Sana will probably know this better than I do, but I think it's a pretty well-known stat that guys will come in, they'll look at the requirements, and they'll fill in 2, and they'll be oh, I will be perfect for this. Whereas girls will probably want to fill at least 90% of them before we dare apply. And exactly. So there really is that I don't know if call it imposter syndrome, confidence boost, psychological barrier, that oftentimes no matter how empowered we are, we all sort of go through it. And that is something that I think is we did get it, receive the advice when I was in the bootcamp, but never enough, I'd say.
Yeah, I think you really need to believe in yourself way before the actual, hiring, applying for a job process happens. And even that is a huge struggle. I'm sure I get questions from people who did boot camps. I'm really struggling with not comparing myself to people with degrees. So honestly, really great job on continuing to push on it. And yeah, I'm really glad you're here with us in this club of engineers. Happy to have you. Thank you so much, Juliette. Those were amazing answers. I'm not sure if you have anything else to add on to what you said, or if you have general advice you'd like to share.
I would just say build. Like just build, even if it's just random fun projects to fix the scheduling of who's going to clean the dishes at your house. Like it doesn't really matter, but that's how you start growing your portfolio and really start having the trust in yourself to then push that forward.
So thank you so much. All right, I think it's Priyanka's and Amal's turn now. So I'm going to hand off to Maria.
Thanks, Yasmin. And of course, thanks to Sana and Juliette for your wonderful answers and your wonderful input. I have the pleasure of introducing the next two panelists. We have Priyanka Ranjan, who is the digital engineering lead at Banque Saudi Francie. She leads the backend, front-end, platform, and QA teams, while also engaging as a full-stack engineer developing backend applications. Welcome, Priyanka. Thanks for joining.
Thank you for having me. I'm so glad to be here, and I've already learned so much from everyone else. I'm so impressed by what everyone has said. So this has been great.
Awesome. I also have the pleasure of introducing Amal Amine, who is a software engineer at Microsoft. Amal has been working in UAE for the past 6 years in roles including full stack development, cloud architecture, and development team leadership. She is also an active co-organizer at Women in Tech Dubai. She and I have been co-hosting our data structures and algorithms study group for over 2 years now. Come join us if you're interested. Thanks for joining, Amal.
Thank you, and great plug for the study group in here. I am happy to be here.
Of course, awesome. Great. So for this part of the panel, we'll focus a little bit more about career development, and we'll also talk about interviews from the perspective of engineers. So first off, I know you both have been on both sides of the interview table. So let's get a bit of like your perspective on when you're hiring for engineers. What kind of characteristics are you looking for in the candidate? Is there something that makes a new graduate or someone who's early in their career sort of stand out? Priyanka?
Yeah, sure. So I've been doing a lot of hiring over the last year, actually. So if you look at Banque Saudi Francie, if you ever want to interview there, just send me your resume. Firstly, I just put a plug in there. But basically, yeah, I've been doing, we hire a lot for junior, mids, and seniors. And I think there are a few characteristics that we look for, irrespective of which level really you're joining a company for. So I think the first thing is exactly what Juliette said. Like in engineers, I always look for someone who's willing to learn and grow, because it's such an ever-changing industry. So it's not only about what you learned a year ago, it's about how you've adapted, how you've grown that knowledge. And if you have that passion to learn and grow, you're not going to be stuck in what worked 7 years ago. You're going to try and figure out what works today. What's the best framework to fix a solution? And that's the kind of passion we're also always looking for. The second thing I actually focus on is that person's attitude, because you're joining a workforce where you're dealing with adults who have a lot of different opinions, of backgrounds, different seniority levels. So whether you like it or not, you're potentially going to face conflict at some point. So how do you handle that conflict? How do you bring a solution to the table by keeping your ego to the side? So it's more of trying to be objective about, I think this solution will work for this problem versus I want this solution to work for this problem. So it's getting to know that person's attitude, getting to know how they raise solutions, how they speak to their peers, how they give respect to get respect. So those things are very important for a team, because the moment you have conflict in a team, it changes the experience for absolutely everyone in that department. So those are two very big things that we look for, and I think is important when you're looking for candidates. And the third, I think, is always like the technical knowledge. And even the technical knowledge, you can actually break it into your theoretical knowledge, which is exactly what Juliette said. Like you can do your tutorials, you can read documentation, you can read like core concepts, which is very important for you to know, because it helps you understand how things work. But you should also know how to put them in a practical space. So do your projects, do your coding assignments, and for us to see what's the balance between your theory versus your experience. So you can't have one versus the other. So if you've worked in one company for 8 years and done only one project, you know how things work one way. So it's always try and push your boundaries to explore how different things are done, focus not only on the theory, but also on practical. So it's getting that mix. So those are the three things, honestly, I would really look for when I'm looking at engineers in this industry.
Great. What about you, Amal?
I think Priyanka summed it up pretty well. One thing I have to add is that when I have been on interviews as the interviewer hiring for a team, that's usually for a team that I also will be in, or that I also will be leading. So how pleasant is the person to work with was a very, very big factor. So yes, attitude and just being able to communicate with this person and come up to the solution, solve a problem together, see how the give and take is, see how non-stubborn and how willing they are to try out new things or learn something new very, very quickly was very, very important. And I think it proved that a lot of the times technology isn't as important as the attitude and willingness to learn and the ability to actually come to a solution and solve a problem logically as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. So how do you sort of balance, I guess, hiring someone who may not have all of the experience with the certain technologies that you already work for? How do you sort of evaluate that candidate?
I can jump to that. So I think tech stack is not as important as your core knowledge in engineering concepts. So for example, we actually focus on Kotlin, but you won't find a lot of Kotlin engineers in this region. So there's no harm in going for Java engineers because the basics are still the same. The core concepts are still the same, right? So it's as long as you have basics. I think if your basics are really strong, if your foundation is strong, it's always a great path to grow into. What I find concerning is if someone is exactly what Amal said, someone is stuck in their ways and they only want to do things one particular way. So I actually don't even look at the years of experience because that's not as important as your quality of the experience you've had. So how many projects you've worked on, what kind of projects you've worked on. Like, I'll give you an example. One of the earliest interviews I had, like first year into programming, I was only working on a project, like a small section of it. And I went into an interview and they asked me to do end to end. And it was the first time I realized like, oh, okay, I need to broaden my horizon. Like, even if my job is only making me work on this, I need to study everything else. So you get that picture and that concept. So the language is not as important. It's the concepts, I would say, that can really make you shine.
Anything to add to that, Amal?
No, I agree. We often do interviews that are completely language agnostic. Actually, we just pick a language on the spot, and we don't really care how you come to a solution. It's or that the actual solution works. It's how you process your thoughts and how you are able to read somebody else's code, or able to contribute, or able to. They are all very important things that we consider. But yeah, I definitely do agree.
Awesome. Okay, so diving a bit more into the interview process. So obviously, like interviewing and being an interviewee is actually quite daunting, but being prepared, I guess, is the only way to go, like, to overcome that. What do we actually can expect at a technical interview, and how can someone actually prepare for it, especially if there's someone who's recently graduated or someone who's still early on in their career?
I can jump on this one. They can be very, very different depending on the role that you're interviewing for and depending on the company. So that's the bad news. There is quite a bit of variety in technical interviews. The good news is you can probably get a lot of information from the HR contact or the recruiter that gets in touch with you the very first thing before you talk to the hiring manager, before you start your interviewing process. You can ask them what format the interviews will take, whether there's a coding exercise or not. You can ask them if they have any tips, any preparation material for you. They will most likely be more than happy to give you all the information that they can give you, since it's in their favor that you succeed as a candidate as well. But one of the standard formats that I've seen a lot is starting off the interview with some theoretical questions, leading up to a coding exercise, followed perhaps by a system design exercise. But yeah, if you'd like to prepare for an interview that kind of follows that format, I personally like to brush up on a few things. So I'll do a quick refresher on some of the most common data structures like trees and graphs, some of the common optimization algorithms and techniques. I'll do some interview practice questions online. There's platforms like LeetCode that are very, very helpful. If I'm able to find somebody or a group that I can do mock interviews with, that's usually very helpful as well. So I can practice talking through my solution and keeping my nerves under control, since that can be a problem under pressure and with somebody watching you write code. But I'll also study some of the concepts around the role that I'm interviewing for. So for example, if I'm interviewing for a web development role, I won't only practice coding exercises. I'll do some reading to remind myself of some of the core concepts. For example, around HTTP, connection protocols, authentication, security, caching, the underlying systems, networking, database design, just so that I'm able to answer the theoretical questions more confidently. Basically, just to seem like I know what I'm talking about, and I don't need to Google everything, although in reality, you might need to Google everything, but it doesn't hurt to do some reading and just take some notes and practice a little bit so that you can present a bit more confidently during the interview. Finally, I really like to also prepare a list of questions that I want to ask the interviewer. It is important to have the interview be like a give and take, not a one-sided conversation. And under so much pressure of like you writing code and you answering theoretical questions, you might not be able to think of the questions that you want to know about the role on the spot. So keeping a list of, you know, what's the day-to-day job like? What do you want to know from the engineers? What do you want to know from the hiring manager? Just questions that you'd like to ask can be very helpful as well, and help you calm down if you're doing some of the asking and waiting for them to answer. It just gives you a little bit of time to kind of keep your nerves under control and catch your breath.
Anything to add to that, Priyanka?
Honestly, I think she covered it beautifully. And it's very true that unfortunately every company does it differently. I've had interviews where like I've gone into a room and 5 engineers have come in 5 hours, and you've done interviews, and it's quite daunting. And I'm trying to change that where we work, where it's a take-home assignment, because you actually get to see how a person is doing. So I just want to, if the only thing I could add was that when you're doing an interview, every single person gets nervous when someone is watching you code. Like it's impossible to write code the best way when someone is literally watching how you do it. You're going to make syntax errors. You're going to forget the most basic things. So firstly, don't be too hard on yourself. It's fine. Everyone understands that. And secondly, it's okay to like take a breath, slow down, talk through what you would like to do architecturally before you jump into the solution. So it also gives them an idea of like how you're thinking before you just go into the coding aspect of it. But yeah, that was perfect. That's exactly what I would have said. Amal.
Cool. So let's talk a little bit about career development. It can be very, very confusing to actually pick a career path in technology, considering that there are so many different fields, so many different specializations. So how can one actually determine the right path for you, right? Priyanka, how did you end up in engineering management, for example?
This is a very interesting question. And I want to start with a little like, just from what I understand, an engineer has as 2 main paths that most of the industry kind of splits you into, which is the one path, which is your tech lead, either your principal engineers, your long-term architects, or more into an engineering manager role. So your tech lead is, you focus more on doing like deep dive, coding best practices, and engineering manager, you focus more on people growth and career path. So every single new engineer I've met, actually not every single, most new engineers I've met are confused on what they want to do, because both have their pros and cons. And I was exactly like that. I was quite confused. And what was interesting is that sometimes life is going to take you by surprise, and your managers are going to see what you're good at and guide you towards that path without you even realizing it. So this is where I've ended up. So I'm guessing all my managers saw that engineering management was what I could do better at. But if you're at a point right now in your career where you have a few years to still make that decision, and you have an inkling towards one versus the other, my advice to you would be like pursue opportunities that could lead you towards one versus the other. So if you are more interested in tech lead, I would say try and mentor younger engineers, or try and find opportunities where you can lead conversations amongst your team of engineers of like best practices, or I saw we're doing this architecture and I think this one could work better, or what are our clean code practices, start documenting stuff like that. So you can find opportunities, and if you do that long enough, or if you do that well and you actually have a passion for it, I'm sure your team will actually see that you're doing that role well and push you towards it. If you're more into engineering management, you could drive more conversations on what kind of culture do you see your team to be in? What do you want to have guild syncs? What do you want your team to strive in? Mentor younger engineers on like goals and career paths themselves, and step into more leadership opportunities with your manager as well. So I think it's more of trying and pushing yourself gradually into one versus the other and seeing what you're more passionate about.
Yeah, that makes sense. Juliette, you have something to add?
Yeah, I think that's right. Like those two are definitely the most predominant ones. I would say another space that I'm also seeing is like the developer advocate role. So it's a role where you're deep in the tech. Maybe you're managing your developer advocacy team, maybe you're not. But it's more about like that educational part of your product. So for example, you're speaking to a developer community, you're setting up demos, you're working on the developer portal, you're working on documentation. So it's more of like a social space within the development work where you need to be an engineer in order to provide this information. But it's less about sort of writing production code and more about making sure that you're tapping into the developer community so that they love your product, and sort of then passing that feedback on to engineering so that they code sort of the feedback that developers are providing. I think it's very niche, especially because it needs to be for products that have a developer audience, but it's a role that I'm seeing on the rise as well on the field.
Yeah, I think that's great. And actually, it brings me to another point that I forgot, which is, I think a few years ago when you chose like tech lead or management, tech lead was this idea that you put your head down and you just code. But what I've learned over the last few years is that whatever role you grow into, your communication skills, your interpersonal skills, those are extremely important. So whatever role you choose, try and grow that as well, because it's an extremely important and valuable asset to be able to take an engineering problem and explain it to people who don't specialize in technology and engineering, and try and get that buy-in as well. So those are my 2 cents.
That makes sense. I think as engineers, we definitely have to focus on like holistic development, not only like just technical side of things. Awesome. Amal, did you have anything to sort of add to that?
No, I agree. There's definitely a lot of options for me. It's been mostly, sort of unfortunately, it's been trial and error. So I have been in roles that I just realized are just not for me. But I was lucky enough to find ways out by just networking with my colleagues that were in the roles that I wanted to be in, and trying to find my ways into the right teams. So it can just be trial and error for you. You could try your hand on something and realize that, hey, this is what I want to do for the next, I don't know how many years. This is great. I see myself growing in this path and going for it. Or you could find yourself ending up in a team that's not quite giving you what you want to do with your life, and try to find your way out of it. That's completely fine.
Yeah, that makes sense. Cool. So now let's talk about a topic that I think at some point all of us have kind of faced, imposter syndrome. So I think being an early career engineer, or even an engineer at any point of your career, you might sort of start to experience imposter syndrome. That is, believing that you might not be as competent as others, or you're doubting your own abilities. So what should an engineer actually focus on to sort of manage it and sort of combat imposter syndrome?
I can jump in here. I have a lot to say about this topic. I'm not sure I have great advice, but there's a couple of things to consider. First of all, it's completely normal to be nervous, to feel unsure about a new role that you're taking on, a new promotion that you're accepting, a new project that you're trying to lead. It's okay. It's normal. It's healthy to be nervous. That's completely fine. And it doesn't make you an imposter or a fraud. Mild anxiety when you face a new situation at your workplace is normal. Everyone experiences it. However, that progressing into imposter syndrome is usually because of the bias and exclusion that women face in male-dominated industries like tech, in my opinion. It can really fuel your self-doubt and the sense of not belonging or just being a fraud. If you think about it, if you spend a large portion of your day and a large portion of your life in general, an environment where it's implied and sometimes explicitly expressed that you don't belong or that you're not as competent as your other colleagues, that's something that you might start to actually harbor internally. So in the ideal world, in my opinion, you fix imposter syndrome by just fixing the biased environments instead of trying to fix ourselves as individuals. But the reality is that we will still have to exist in the toxic workplaces that are available for us to exist in. So my advice would be to actively try to be part of communities where you do belong and are able to discuss these issues with people who have similar experiences. So that can be women's groups or communities at work in your city, global groups. The idea is that it's just very helpful for you to have your experiences validated because they're shared by so many other women. And that kind of muffles down the self-doubt and the insecurity that you have, because if so many other women are experiencing the same thing, your experiences are valid and they are real. So it'll help you be more aware of the bias that you are facing at work and how it's affecting you. And hopefully it'll help you be more confident and more able to brag about your achievements despite of the imposter syndrome. But that's just my opinion about it. I'd love to hear if anyone else has any more practical advice.
Yeah, I love that. And I think definitely building with community is very practical, right? It's like you're finding people who are struggling through the same things you are and sort of building together. Something else that I like to think is like Jeff Bezos, right? Like when he was building Amazon, he didn't know what he was doing. You know, he was running through it. He probably felt as an investor at some point. And so really going back and thinking that like whenever someone is doing important work, they must have felt like an imposter at some point. And really just connecting with that reality that I think like, yes, women through studies have proven that like we maybe harbor it a bit stronger than men, but realistically, everyone goes through it. And so it's a matter of like connecting with ourselves, trusting our why, right? Like why we got into it in the first place and really going through that like psychological empowerment to keep pushing forward and knowing as well that like we're headed towards where meant to go. I think especially, for example, in a recruitment process where as candidates, you're like, oh, I wish they hire me, right? Like I'm looking for a job. But really, they also need the talent and like the best world is when both of us meet. Like I don't want someone who doesn't want me. And I think that should always like be in front of the conversation that like we're both searching for each other. And I think the same thing happens, you know, with career paths as we climb up the ladder.
Yeah, I think that's great. Everything both of you said is absolutely brilliant. And it's just one thing I could add. It's some advice I got actually quite recently when I was also struggling, because every single person faces it at some point, quite often sometimes. But it's more of realizing that every person you work with, everyone's a human and every single person is good at things and everyone is not that great at things. So try and find what you're good at and encourage yourself, like be your own cheerleader in those aspects. So yeah. Sorry, it got stuck. All back.
Yeah. Yeah, Sana, do you want to add to that as well?
Yeah, I just probably wanted to add something quite different. Like if you sometimes feel like you feel like you have an imposter syndrome, or you feel lack of confidence, like, oh my God, I'm going to be, let's say, first time manager, or I'm going to be working on this project with some new technologies or some new, principles, etc. Then know one thing, that if it is easy, it's boring. If it doesn't challenge you, then it's not for you. But always be ready to challenge yourself, and this is the only way to progress in your career. So if you feel like you're an imposter in any team or leading a team, blah blah, tell yourself, okay, I'm an imposter, but I'm gonna do it. I'm not gonna shy away from accomplishing something.
Yeah, and I think
that was really cool.
Yeah, I'll just say that the cool thing is that when you like accomplish one, then it's like a bit easier to do the next one, and then it's a bit easier, and then like the challenges that you're willing to take up on yourself just start like growing in size. And I think that that's just a super rewarding feeling, and it all sort of boils down to how you're dealing with that fear and that like imposter syndrome of putting yourself out there.
And you feel extremely proud of yourself, that like, wow, I'm able to do this. I was just not sure why I wasn't doing it in the first place. So just do the things, be out there, challenge yourself, and be vocal, be present, and be there. Whichever opportunity is there, create opportunities yourself if there are none.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. That was really insightful. So as we are at the last couple of minutes of our panel event, we're going to go ahead and open up to the Q&A section. So let's take a look at if there are some good questions in the live chat. Okay, we've got a question here. Currently over halfway with CS50, that is, I believe, Harvard's introductory course to computer science. What's the difference between a boot camp and an intro course such as CS50? It seems like a boot camp might lead to employment. I'm not sure if Juliette, you might be able to speak to this.
Yeah, sure. So I think it really boils down to the close mentorship and the accountability. I've taken CS50. It's an amazing course, highly recommended to anyone interested just in understanding computer science in general. But it's a course that you're taking on your own. And that's great. I mean, it's free. You're learning a bunch from Harvard. So, there's definitely nothing wrong about that. But I think the value added that a bootcamp provides is being able to pair you up with other people who are interested in learning about these things, who are your pair programming with, and that whenever you have a question, you have either a buddy that's helping you out or a teacher who is deeper, more advanced into the industry as you are. And really that like structured learning path is super useful in making sure that by the time that you finish, you've accomplished X, Y, and Z, and sort of understand the industry in a more holistic level. I think CS50 is great for understanding computer science, but probably if you then want to advance in JavaScript, then you need to take something else, and then you may go into database, and you may get to go into backend. And so development is such a huge space that when you're learning on your own, it can be hard to understand the learning path, where to go and what to choose. And I think that's a big part of what bootcamps offer, as well as usually guidance as well, and like getting that first job and putting yourself out there and understanding the ins and outs of the industry.
Is there anyone else who might want to add to that? Cool. We'll go on to the next question then. So this person is interested in project management in tech, but has no prior knowledge or experience. So how much technical knowledge does this person sort of need to be a project manager?
That's a good question, and I can see silence in it. I can try and give advice. I don't work with many project managers. More, I think a lot of people now follow Scrum, so Scrum Masters and product owners, which are very, might be slightly different. If you're going into more not very heavy tech roles, I think it's always great if you're working with a tech team to understand the basics of how things work and connect to each other. You might not need to know deep down how coding works or how you should be able to write particular a solution or code a solution, but you should understand what's the difference between front end, back end, why a system or a story or a project could take 2 weeks versus 3 months, just by having an understanding of, okay, you need a middleware, you need a backend system, you need databases, needs to get deployed to cloud. So the basics of the overall picture might be very helpful, but you don't need to have a deep dive into anything. Happy for anyone else to add to that.
No, I just wanted to thank Juliette, but unfortunately she had to leave. Yeah, definitely we can connect with her later. We've shared her LinkedIn profile, and we'll also share her Twitter profile in the live chat. Cool. We'll just squeeze in 2 more questions maybe. One question here is asking about an ideal headline. So this person has recently finished a coding and computer science bootcamp and is struggling with imposter syndrome when she uses the full stack developer title, because they're kind of new to the field. So what would be an ideal headline?
Can I answer that question? Because
yeah,
I know what we're looking for usually. The headline should reflect her bootcamp course that she have taken and the skills that she has learned. But it should be like not too long, but it could be broke up in a few words, in chunks, like full stack engineer or just full stack, and then slash the tech stack, and then applications that she has probably developed or learned how to develop or worked on. So that's very important, like full stack, tech stack, I mean, the tech stack that she's working with, and then the types of projects that she want to run. She could also mention SaaS or PaaS or B2B or whatever. So this is important for us recruiters. Yeah.
Hopefully that answers your question. Great. One more question. So this is actually asking what kind of drove each of you into tech, and more specifically engineering. So if anyone wants to answer that.
Yeah, sure. So I can jump into my story. So back in school, I think we had an option between biology and computers. And there was no way I could do biology because it's a lot of just memorizing, while programming is very logical. So you don't have to like memorize anything. It's more of, once you understand a concept, it's all about how you apply it. And I really liked that aspect. So that's what drove me into engineering, actually. It's just like the logical thinking aspect of it, where it's ever changing, it's ever growing, and you can do what you can with the concepts, which is just, it's a huge world out there. There's no right or wrong way of writing code. There's clean code guidelines, but those are just guidelines. How you write it and how you interpret it is completely your own. So I really like that whole concept.
Yeah, mine's not a very
sorry, go for it.
No, mine's not a very inspiring story. It's just that I was the youngest in a family with very, very large age gaps. So I was the one in charge of computers, everything. And because I heard from everyone that I'm so good at computers, I believed it as like this young kid, because restarting at, you know, the modem or restarting the computer was the pinnacle of computer expertise. So I just started going for everything computers in school because I believed I was so good at it. Turns out I am, and I just continued with it, and it turns out I actually enjoyed it. That's about it.
That makes sense. Yes, please. Yeah.
Sorry?
Do you want to tell us a little bit about why you got into engineering?
Sure. So I actually have been programming since I was I was quite young, so maybe like 10 or something. There was so much happening on the internet back then, like things like Neopets, MySpace, all that stuff, and I loved it. I loved being able to, like, especially Neopets. I spent a lot of time on Neopets. I loved playing around with HTML back then and like trying to make my profile pretty, my shop pretty, trying to sell things there. I didn't know that was programming back then. I had no idea that was actually it. I was just playing around with different colors and shit. And then when I got older, I still didn't know about this thing called programming. I was literally just playing around all the time. And then I think once I reached the age of 17 or something, I got exposed into this degree called computer science. And I found out what programming was. And I was like, oh, okay, I've been doing this. So it feels very natural for me to continue doing this. And yeah, I do love it. It's a very creative field and it really aligns with what I like doing. And that's kind of how I jumped into it. So Neopets kind of got me into, I have that to thank for my career.
Awesome. Thanks. So yeah, unfortunately, we do have to wrap up this panel event. So I'd like to give a huge shout out to all our panelists. Thank you so much for joining, taking the time out of your evening to help us answer these questions and help the local community of engineers. Also like to thank the co-organizers of this panel, Yasmin and Ming, who worked behind the scenes. We will be uploading this session on YouTube, so you can definitely rewatch and share it. Thank you everyone for attending. We hope this session sort of helps you with your job hunting and with your career as well. If you're looking for a job, please feel free to add your details in our job seekers form. It's attached to the meetup. And we will probably send the link again with the YouTube video. But besides that, thank you and have a good night, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you guys. This is amazing. Have a good night. Bye.
Good night, ladies. Bye-bye.